Allegro. It means fast in Italian, I think. Allegro, Allegro. Or quite fast, not really fast. Allegro, Allegro. I'm Jonny Smith, this is Car Pervert, and today I'm going to do a video on my Austin Allegro Street Sleeper. Britain's most hated car, but a car that I have a bit of an affinity towards because my auntie had one, a poo brown one, and my grandma and grandpa had a mustard coloured one with a square steering wheel. And I always promised myself I'd buy one day and build something with it, and that's what this car promises to be behind me. It's not finished. I started it in 2007 and it's been sat dormant for a long time, and this video is a story of what's happened until now and what happens next. It's been a little while since I've seen the car, and it has been neglected. It's been sat in this, albeit dry, lock-up, stashed away for about the last 3 years, waiting for the next stage of the build. And luckily today, it's actually going to be going somewhere to have this unfinished business finished. So I'm going to pull it out, give you a talk around it, and show you some pictures of what happened to it in the past and how I found it. Brakes are seized on, so I'm going to have to drag it out. This will be the second time I've dragged an Allegro out with my wife's Jimny this year. What's happening to me? I'm better than this. So here she is, the barn find, not really barn find, actually in a council lock-up Allegro. That interior is a spare interior which I haven't decided whether I'm going to use. But the car itself, ignore the dust, it's actually a very, very straight, solid, original, unmolested basis for a project which I like, and I'm going to keep that original paint as much as possible. It does need some local repairs, which we're probably going to do some localised paint work on it, but try and blend it in and machine polish it. Those wheels are actually not Allegro wheels, they're 14-inch instead of 13s, and they're from a Mark V Polo which has had lugs welded onto it so we can fit the original hubcaps. So why did I buy this car? Well, I bought this car because two-door Allegros are hard to find, beggars can't be choosers, and it came up for sale and I'd been looking everywhere for it, and the guy wouldn't take an offer on it. It was an auction on eBay as a spares or repairs project. Quite vague, he sort of wanted the money back for what the engine and the bumpers owed him, and it ended up being a pretty solid car for one of these. Chassis and everything is pretty good. I bought it blind, I had no idea how solid it was and how original it was. I realised it was a 48,000 mile, I think, from new, 2 lady owner car, one lady called Mary, one lady called Joyce, and I love the fact that I'd looked everywhere in the country for one, and I'd found one within minutes of where I grew up, in fact, in Somerset. And the engine under the bonnet, the A-Series 1300, I knew I wasn't going to keep that, and so I ended up selling that 48,000 mile 1300 to a guy that races Mini Clubmans for almost double what I paid for the car. And then I bought the donor vehicle, which was the Rover 827 SI, and that car ended up being the perfect donor. At the time they weren't worth very much. I got it for a steal for 150 quid. They're worth a lot more now, and it's a 5-speed manual, so a very rare car, and all the guts of that have gone into the Allegro. What is really freaky for me, and I love sifting through the service history of cars, is that the Rover 827 was nowhere near from where I'm living now in Lincolnshire. Looking through the service history, when it was 2 years old, still under warranty, it broke down on like the road next to the road I was living on at the time, when someone was obviously visiting friends or family. I just think that's freaky. This is the party piece of the sleeper. I don't want any bonnet bulges, I don't want any giveaways that this is packing way more punch than it used to have. So there's the 2.7 24 valve Rover / Honda V6 front wheel drive lump. Actually fits quite neatly in there. And that engine is very, very reliable. Coupled with the fact that it doesn't cost that much money, we've got space in the engine bay to hopefully fit an aftermarket supercharger. I say aftermarket, mine's actually off a donor Mercedes SLK compressor. It's an Eaton M62, but you can see in the engine bay where the bespoke engine mounts have been fitted and the custom strut tops for the new adjustable coilover suspension in place of the original. That engine's got to come out to not just have the engine bay finished and painted, but also to have the engine detailed itself and sort out the induction system and the position of the supercharger and the rest of the wiring. You've got a remote oil cooler on the back there, and you've also got a relocated oil filter on the right hand side, and that is because in its original place it was too vulnerable underneath the car, so we decided to blank it off and make it a remote oil filter. All this work was done by another company, MB Motorsport, many years ago. I'm hoping the engine bay can kind of still look factory with some British Leyland stickers on the inner wings, and we're going to detail the engine to make it look quite pretty, but you'll see the total absence of a radiator, and that's because it lives in the back, and that hasn't really gone beyond the experimental stages yet, but the cooling will be in the rear with some forced air and some electric fans. That's the plan. This engine in standard form is just under 180 horsepower. With a supercharger, I think it'll be just under 250, but the car will be under 875 kilos in weight because that engine weighs less than the original Allegro A series. So the supercharger's going on it, but I also have got a mappable ECU from Specialist Components, so we can bring that power in and we can dial it in properly on a rolling road. I'm also toying with the idea of a limited slip diff. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it, but I want it to behave, you know, like a bit of a trackable animal, really, and I need a bit of torsional rigidity into it, which is why I'm probably going to get a strut brace or two. So I've got a few other bits hoarded for it in the garage. This is a front panel from an Allegro A Keep, which is probably the rarest of the Allegros, and this came from a mate of mine, Simon. That front valance there is going to go on mine. I'm probably going to have a bit of forced air induction in those grills, either going to the engine, the supercharger, or it could be going to the brakes. You see the front of mine has a Series 1 grill. Mine's a 1977 car, which is a Series 2, but I'm pretty much retrospectively changing it to a Series 1. In the corner of the garage I've actually got a spare V6 as well, and an interior for an keep, but I'm not sure if I'm going to use that interior yet. I might keep it nice and brown. Okay, inside's a bit of a dumping ground at the moment because I've been buying lots of accessories and spares and things. And I've put the Quartic steering wheel on it, so although it's a Series 2 car, it shouldn't have a square steering wheel. I'm going to turn it into a sort of Series 1 clone, really. And inside's going to be as faithful to the original as possible. I've got a very rare brown centre console, which I'm going to put a rev counter in. We're going to have the mappable ECU in here, so there's going to be some interesting bits in the glove box, maybe concealed, new carpet set, and probably either going to find some better velour chairs or repair these with some crochet knitted covers or something like that. I've got a few ideas in my head anyway. And my auntie's Pooh Brown Series 2 was a two-door, and this is not Pooh Brown, it's antique gold, believe it or not. It's pleasantly awful, grim British Leyland colour. But under here is where we're going to go to town on the detail and the execution. This car will be detailed in the areas you can't see. But if you look at the rear trailing arm suspension there, that's the original trailing arm, but it now has coilover, adjustable coilover, horizontally mounted. The front's coilover suspension as well, so no more hydroelastic. There's the start of a custom exhaust down there, and that is going to end before the back of the car because I don't want to give the game away. Those drum brakes at the rear are going to go. It's going to have bigger brakes, discs at the back. They're already discs at the front, but the front discs were probably going to have to be improved in size, I think, ultimately. I want this car to be able to go on track days, but I also want it to be able to be quite comfortable. The car's been sat dormant for too long now, and that is why today's quite special. So we've got Woolsgrave Transport taking the car over to Shropshire today to Midland Performance and Retro, and they're going to finish what was started some years ago now and do it justice. And I think because they've worked on a lot of custom vehicles, they've worked on a lot of British cars, British Leyland stuff, they've got a bit of an affinity and an understanding for what I'm trying to achieve here. I'm going to be sourcing some second-hand parts, but I'm also going to be looking for some brands to collaborate with the cooling and the suspension and the steering and maybe some of the other engine parts. A lot of people ask me, why didn't I make it rear-wheel drive? Why did I use the engine that we've gone for? The simple answer is I wanted to keep it in the sort of Rover, Austin Rover family. So the Rover 827 was an early 90s car, the one I bought. The engine was developed with Honda, a very smooth, silky V6. It's a budget car. It's quite a budget build, really. And I didn't want to make it rear-wheel drive. I didn't want to hack up the chassis and the transmission tunnel. I wanted to hopefully distill all of the kind of know-how of hot hatches into this. So hopefully we'll be able to build something with a bit of torsional rigidity, some adjustable suspension, some brakes that are worthy of track days, but keep it as that sleeper, that faded original paint car. I'm excited because this has been such a long time coming, and I really want to do this car justice. I think that it's going to annoy a lot of people and confuse a lot of people, but that's the point of a street sleeper, is it not? I really want it to be almost British Leyland's long lost experimental answer to a hot hatch, and I really want the engine bay to look like it could have been a factory installation. I love the fact that the body is just good enough to kind of preserve and keep a few dents here and there from its elderly lady past. So as I wave goodbye to my British Leyland lovely, which is emotional, in its antique gold glory, yeah, it really is antique gold apparently, that colour. All that's left to say is thank you very much for watching Car Pervert. Thank you for contacting me about this car and showing so much appreciation and wanting me to do a video on it. Stay tuned to see what we're going to do next for all the consecutive episodes documenting the progress of this street sleeper Allegro.